to Thriving in Business and Life. This is Will Wilkinson.
And I'm Christopher Harding, and today we're going to be talking about what we call foundational values. So,
values being the foundation of our lives.
Well, some people say that, right? I'm not sure we always live that way.
I believe I just said that. I could be wrong.
I thought it was maybe an echo.
But you're right. Some people would agree with that. Some people might not.
Well, and even if I philosophically agree with it, you hear a lot of organizations say we're a values-based organization. And I'm sure that that's very well-meaning and sometimes very well-lived. But the question is, how often do we really live our values?
Yeah, there's professed values, what we say, and then there's what we do.
Right.
And the show me people are like, show me your values in action. Don't tell me about them.
Well, and I was just with a wonderful organization a couple of days ago, and we were going through with all of their different leaders, their vision statement and their values, and asking them the question, are these values in your team or your department simply something that's on the wall or in a wallet card? Or do you actually incorporate them into the way you interact with each other?
Well, the example of the negative of that, in other words, not walking the talk, that I recall was an explanation of something called the pseudopodok ego. Well, I just use that term because it makes me sound like really smart.
The
pseudopodok ego.
Okay,
and please,
explain.
None of our listeners look that up. It'll bust me. But the concept was this. You've got an organization that chronically undervalues women.
Oh,
and they get flack for it. So they decide to do something about it. So they promote one woman to the vice presidential position in Duluth or Dismal Seepage, Montana. And then they put it on the front page of their global newsletter and become a champion for women's rights.
Oh, yeah.
So they're professing to have a value that they've just begun to develop, but their real value is their public relations image. Isn't that an interesting phenomenon?
That is interesting, yeah. And, so that's when an easy one, I think, to see, especially when it's a company doing something that blatant, right? So the question I come back to myself as I take my glasses off, as we've said before, I wear those at times so I feel smarter.
Nobody can see you, Chris.
Oh,
Sorry.
That's right. It's radio.
It's radio.
But I feel smarter. That's the important thing.
And you certainly look smarter to me.
Well, and that's important.
It is.
So the trick, I think, sometimes is to ask myself, am I doing that? Is there a way that I'm professing values, for whatever reason, because I want to look good, because I feel better about myself, because I think I should.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it gets into downright hypocrisy, like fighting for peace.
Yeah.
And that statement Tom Lehrer made years ago, the 60s folk singer. There are some people who do not love their fellow man. And I hate people like that. So there's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Saying one thing, but actually behaving the opposite way.
Well, we do a lot of values work on our coaching, you and I both, with our clients, and I remember actually working with one of the really large operational software companies in the world, whose name we won't mention because a lot of people don't like this company.
But it begins with?
But in any case, they had us come in to help them because they were losing people as some of the other companies started to really fire up and become more prominent. Some of their talent was fleeing to these other companies. And what they realized was that what they had was a values conflict. They were telling their people they had certain values that they absolutely weren't living. And so they wanted us to come up and have people learn and start to get straight on what their own values were.
Rather than prescribed values.
Well, yeah, and what we found was, and I don't know whether this is always typical of people, but I find it far more typical than one might expect. And you and I have had conversations about this, that people have values where they're actually shoulding themselves. Yeah. Their family had some values that they feel like they have to adopt, or their community or their society has values. And so they would put those on their list of their values, but they're actually borrowed values.
Well, I have a borrowed value from my dad, and it's a joke in our family, but one of my dad's values was to be efficient.
Okay.
So for him, that meant you couldn't ever just do one thing. Like, you didn't just go to town to shop in one
Right.
store. You went to 5 stores. And you linked them together in an elaborate web that in his mind, the value was he was being more efficient. But the joke to us was that we could see that often it was far less efficient. So our family joke is, yeah, I'm going to go to Alaska via France. It's on the way.
Yeah.
But that was a value he had that he never questioned. It was very important for him to do 1, 2, 3, 4 things all in a row. I've borrowed it. I inherited it. And now, I mean, here we live in Ashland. It's all a 15 minutes drive into Medford. I won't just drive into Medford to do one thing. I've got to have 3 or 4 things to do. Where did I get that value from?
Well, and I think there might be a lot of people who are listening who go, yeah, that's an important value. And so then the other trick comes is, let's say that is an important value to you. It's up to you whether that matters or not, right? But the challenge is, do I then try to impose that value onto other people?
Well, there's that, but there's also missing what's the priority, because the one thing that I need to do in Medford may be really important. And if my greater value is that I need to have 3 things to do, so I don't do it, that's a loss.
Or that when you do it, you're not fully present.
Right.
Well, so that's one of those things too. So let's say that efficiency is a value you have. And one of the things we try to help people sort through is, what is the priority of their values? Let's say efficiency is one value, and that's fine. But let's say another value to you is having authentic, real time with people. That being present with people is hugely important to you. Then you ask yourself the question, which is most important? Is it more important for me to be efficient in this situation or to be present? And then if I've got a conflict, I just decide, well, maybe for some people, no, efficiency.
Right. Well, and it changes from circumstance to circumstance, correct?
Yeah. One thing I don't really need to be real present in this situation, so I'm going to be efficient. And so part of that is just being conscious of what are my values? Are they borrowed or are they mine? If I've borrowed one and it works for me, that's okay too. But far too often, that isn't the case. I had a young guy that I used to coach who was a songwriter and a singer, phenomenal voice. I mean, the guy, if you heard him on the radio, women would swoon and guys would go, wow, that guy's cool. Well, he had this amazing voice, and he had this value that, for him, a career in the music business was a value that really drove almost everything he did.
That's what he wanted.
Well, that's what he said he wanted, but I noticed there was this disconnect. I was coaching him in his career, and I noticed that he wouldn't complete things. He would kind of self-sabotage himself. And so I asked him one day, I said, hey, I want to ask you a question. When did you first know that you wanted to be this, performer, this musical artist? Yeah. And he said, well, it's what my dad always wanted.
So a borrowed value.
Yeah, it was, his dad couldn't have the career. His dad always encouraged him and gave him strokes for his talent. And I said to him, but is it your dream? It sounds to me like you're trying to live your dad's dream. And he said, no, I think it's mine. I went, you think it's yours? Yeah. Well, long story short, what I ended up doing was challenging him. I said, look, if you really want to sort this out, go move to Nashville. He wanted to be a country artist, or his dad wanted to be a country artist, I guess it was. And he went to Nashville, and within about 18 months came face to face with the realization that wasn't his dream.
Wow. There are so many stories like that where someone wakes up to the fact that they're actually not even living their own life.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of a Jungian comment. I think it was Robert Johnson who made this popular in his book, Living Your Unlived Life, who said the greatest burden any of us carry is the unlived life of our parents.
Yeah, that's just, it's haunting in a whole other way.
Well, when I read that, my response was to look at my own life. And I reflected on memories I had of my dad, who was a very responsible guy, lived between the lines, paid his bills, was really a wonderful dad for all the obvious metrics. He didn't drink much, he was very stable. Meanwhile, he had these dreams that he never fulfilled. And so I can see clearly that part of my burden is to get outside of the lines and to fling myself out into novelty because my dad never did that.
Well,
now, sometimes that works and sometimes that definitely doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a really good question. I really haven't contemplated values in that way, but for me, so for example, a lot of times people say we're either living the life of our parents or in reaction to our parents. Yeah. And I know my mother, for example, was really an agoraphobic. She was afraid to go anywhere, afraid for us to go anywhere. So she always tried to sabotage any trips we were going to take or anything we were going to do that she considered to be dangerous. Well, I decided that I was going to see the world. And so I created jobs that almost forced me to travel into uncomfortable places and do all kinds of things. And you know,
and as far as you knew, you were doing what you wanted to do.
Well, yeah, I was living out a passion, but it was a passion in reaction to. So this value I had to see the world actually trumped some other values that I didn't really realize I was in conflict with, like my family.
Right.
You know?
Little things like your family.
Yeah. So
you know, this is a huge topic, and I'm guessing that our listeners are sort of seeing the magnitude that these conflicting values operate on. I mean, sabotage is a word, self-sabotage is a term you used a moment ago, and I think that's really true. If a person doesn't begin to examine their lives, as Socrates said, the unexamined life isn't worth living. You know, maybe using yourself as an example, Chris, and I can chip in, let's get into the how. Because the what is interesting enough, and even the why, but the how, like how do we learn what values are ours, what are borrowed, and how do we make a change?
Well, yeah, and this is, you know, in our book, we talk about this in our third chapter, and there's a little exercise that we devised that we've used for quite a while that's pretty simple. And so if someone were to get a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle from top to bottom, and on one side of the paper, the right-hand side, let's say, you know, write down 5 to 10 of the values that you consider important to you. And so I want to give a little bit of a heads up on this. By values, I don't mean things that people think you should have. What I'm going to ask you to do is write down what is it that lights you up? What are the characteristics?
Well, and listeners could do this right now if they wanted to just pause the podcast, get a piece of paper and pen and do it. And if you have the book, it's on page 54.
There you go.
So more shameless self-promotion.
You start to list the values that light you up. Like I said, one that did light me up, even though it was in reaction to, was travel. That was a value for me. Family, spending time in relationship with my wife, my kids, and so on. That was definitely a value. Pursuing my career was a value for me. And so, I started to write down the things that make you feel alive, the things that light you up, the things that you're passionate about. That's how I love to define values rather than shoulds.
And those are on the right side of the page.
Those are on the right side of the page. So maybe 5 to 10 of those at the most. And then, just take a look at those. Now on the left-hand side of the page, write down how you spend your time. Just look at the last week and say, where did I spend the bulk of my time? Doing what?
So these are just your behaviors, where you put your time.
What are your actions? Where you put your time? And then, write down 5 or 10 primary activities during your week, and then compare it to the right side of the page and say, do my activities align with my values? Am I spending my time doing things that light me up, doing things that I'm passionate about?
Well, and as we advised readers in the book, if we discover there's some conflict there, we're not living all our values, we're putting time into things that don't match up with our values, don't panic. Of course, as many of our listeners will know, that's on the title of the Manual for the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. A great book by Douglas Adams. Don't panic and take a towel. So those were the values in that book.
Don't panic and take
don't
a towel.
panic. if they're out of harmony, because some values change over time as we enter different seasons of our life. And I think that's a good point to make.
Yeah, that is. It is. And for example, for me, when I started to realize that travel was actually impacting some of my other values, I began to gradually change how I did my business life. But here's another really important thing, and this is one that I think can trip us up. We run into this in workshops all the time or in coaching sessions. Somebody looks at their life and they go, but I look at my life and it's very mundane, and I've got these values of the things that I'm passionate about, and there's this misalignment and huge cognitive dissonance,
Yeah,
right?
if only I could do what I really wanted to do.
Right. And yeah, exactly. And so the thing that you and I have both brought out, and we talk about this all the time, is that our values and living our values is not situationally dependent.
Exactly. Yeah, we can express our values into any situation, right?
Right.
Now that is easy to say, not necessarily so easy to do, but it's incredibly profound and life-changing. You know, the little phrase I use, because I like shorthand phrases that are easy to remember, is, I experience what I express.
Right.
I experience what I express. So if one of my values is friendship, then a sure way for me to live that value is to be friendly.
Well,
Right? It's
in
not
any
to wait for friends to
circumstance.
come around. It's I be friendly.
Well, and so when we were working with this big software company, one of the challenges that people were saying is, well, my one of my strong values is family, and I spend all this time working. So we said, well, let's start to play with some ways that you could infuse family into your work. Now, first of all, I could start to begin to really care about the people I work with like family. That'd be one way to infuse it. The other way would be, maybe I bring my kids in at the end of the day, or maybe I, take a project home if I have to do some additional work, and I show them what I'm doing. If I'm out of town, I send them a text to let them know I'm thinking about them. There are situations that are certainly making it more challenging for me to spend literal time maybe with my family, but how can I infuse them into my thinking and into what I do?
Well, yes, totally agreed. And I've gone through this process, and I'm sure some of our listeners have as well. The big question is, what motivates us to do that? Because as you know, inertia is hard to break. And the minute things are working a certain way, it develops weight. And it's more likely we'll keep doing things the way we're doing them than we'll change, even if we don't like what's happening.
We've been big advocates, and always are, of peer accountability and peer coaching. So find a friend. If it's somebody in your life like a spouse or a partner, they can become that accountability partner, but it's got to be done lovingly, and it has to be done with grace. And I share with them, hey, I really want to start to infuse, and choose just one to start out with, one particular value into everything I do, or to try to find places. And I had a great experience.
I just want to interrupt you for a moment to emphasize that, because the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step.
Quick, easy wins.
Yeah, a single step is a lot easier to take than contemplating a 1,000-mile journey. And the easy wins, picking the low-hanging fruit. Like I sometimes say to clients, do something.
Yeah.
Anything. And, it's easier to do something and then course correct than to try and figure out the perfect thing to do. The example I use is sitting in your car.
Right.
Try to steer to turn your steering wheel so that the minute you begin moving, you're heading in the right direction. It's almost impossible to do. You start moving slowly, and then it's easier to turn the wheel and correct.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And so if I choose one value, share with maybe a couple of people, hey, I'm trying to infuse this more into my life. If you see me doing it, give me a high five. If you notice me not, help me catch that. And I was on a flight to L.A. from New York one time. Happened to be sitting next to an actress. I'd been bumped up into first class, and she was fairly new in her celebrity and fame. She'd been in a couple of TV shows that were well known, and we got to talking, and she was kind of saying, I feel guilty about bemoaning my celebrity, but I feel like I can't go out and really be myself anymore because I feel exposed.
I know exactly what she was saying. A former partner of mine was a TV news anchor up in Canada, in a small area, but she was on every day and on TV every day. And so she was well recognized, and she complained to me that she hated shopping because she'd
Right.
be shopping for underwear and people would be following her.
Oh, yeah, that would be kind of creepy.
It was very creepy, and she was a very private person, even though she had a public career. So this was a big problem for her, and she would shrink away from her celebrity,
yeah.
which may be what this person was doing.
Well, she was, and the real conflict for her. So you start to talk about a values conflict. So she had a real deep value for loving people. She just liked people, and she loved to interact with them and shower attention on them in a real positive way. And she found herself going out in disguise and wearing dark glasses and a baseball cap and almost hiding from people. And she was getting depressed because
it's a total conflict.
Yeah. So I said to her, "Are you willing to take a little challenge?" And she just kind of looked at me like, maybe,
What's he really saying?
And so I said, listen, here's just a game. Just as the week goes on over this next couple of weeks, decide times when you're willing to go out, hopefully not in disguise, but even if you are, and your goal is to see how many people you can light up. Just by smiling at them, by saying hello, maybe it's asking them how they are, maybe it's the person at the dry cleaners or the guy at the market that checks you out.
Wow. How did she react to that idea? Because you were inviting her to live her real values.
Yeah.
Which she had not been doing. What was her reaction?
Well, she kind of got this little bit of almost like a little kid grin on her face, kind of mischievous almost, and went, okay.
Well, I'm sure part of that was the way you framed it as a game.
Yeah, that's
this
true.
This will be fun to do.
Well, and she had a bit of a spunky personality. So I said, here's the deal. Accountability is always part of this. I'm going to get in touch with you in 2 weeks, meet you for lunch at your favorite, place in the valley, there in San Fernando Valley. I'll buy, and you tell me the stories of all the people you were able to light up.
Chris, this is a very elaborate way to get a date with an actress. I just got to say, I'm taking notes here.
It was actually, the motive was actually really true.
I have to vouch for you. You're a very honorable man.
So long story shorter, I met her, and I walked into the restaurant, and she was beaming, and no disguise. And we sat down, and she just was lit up and told me all of these situations of just the coolest little moments that she had created with people, because she decided to find the ways for her to be true to her values and to infuse this really important value of loving people into her day-to-day life.
And there was no downside.
She hadn't experienced one yet. We talked about that, though, and said, there may be times when you'll find that it's not appropriate. And if that's the case, just remember you always get to still decide how you interpret your experience and what you do with it.
Well, you're reminding me of that popular acronym for the word fear: false expectations appearing real.
Yeah.
And that's where she was at. She had fear about what would happen if she lived a value that was very important to her. And then when she, took you up on your offer to play this game, she found there was nothing to fear. It was just a false expectation that appeared to be real until she challenged it and discovered that it was an illusion.
Well, and the other thing too, we've talked about the reticular activating system. So
love that term. Every time you say it, I think, boy, this is really,
our intelligence stock goes up.
My IQ just goes up every time I even hear it. I don't even have to say it myself. I'm not sure I can pronounce it right.
You can just say RAS.
Oh yeah. Okay, talk more about the RAS.
So when it's the mechanism that decides what we focus on. It filters things out, and it also focuses on things. So for her, in the game, she decided that she was going to look for moments to be lit up and to light other people up. So her subconscious mind actually started looking for those opportunities and helping her create those. So that's important too.
Yeah, well, let's talk about this. We've only got a few more minutes left here, but the payoff. We don't do anything new unless we've got some kind of promise of a payoff. They say either, relieve pain or, receive pleasure. So I think it's important in looking at those two lists and deciding to do some reorganizing to identify, well, what's the payoff? Why would I want to adjust my values? Okay, I'll be living them, but what will that feel like? We've got to be motivated to
yeah.
make any kind of change, right?
Well, and can I use another fancy word?
Oh, I can't wait.
So when you talked about, moving towards pleasure and avoiding pain, that's tropism, right? All biological mechanisms have that biological tendency.
Named after Daniel Trope.
Yeah, I actually don't know where that name came from. We're going to have to look that up. Wouldn't it be weird if it was Daniel Trope? So if I think about that and I start to think of, okay, values, if I think of values as things that light me up, not things I should do, but things that actually bring me joy, bring me passion, have me feel more vital. And then I start to think about, how am I going to infuse that into this meeting I'm going into? I'm about to go into a really difficult meeting, and there might even be somebody there that I find to be difficult, but I have this value of being really present and let's say I have a value of loving people or being kind to people or a value of collaborating. So I go in there with the intention set to collaborate or to find value in people or to love people. And now what I'm looking for is opportunities to do that. And I actually begin to get myself feeling that, like you said, before I even go into the meeting.
Well, yeah, because you're playing a game.
Right.
I want to repeat that. It's fun and it's a challenge. And regardless of what we say about wanting security, and we all need a certain amount of security, the term we use for the worst form of incarceration is maximum security. I've always thought that was a very interesting term.
That's kind of ironic.
It's very ironic that, what we seem to want is also what we would dread the most, maximum security. So we need a baseline of security, but the scenario you are portraying here is one of challenging us to get out of our comfort zone, try something that we want to try, and get to experience ourselves as the hero in our own lives.
Right. Yeah, as we talked about in the drama triangle, it's even the creator of my own experience, the moving it even from I'm a hero and somebody else is who I'm against. I'm the creator and other people are my collaborators.
Well, we always like to end these calls with something special for our listeners, and this week it's just occurring to me, why don't we give them a stretch? That's a term I use occasionally when I'm coaching. Client will have a stretch. This is something for them to do, getting out of their comfort zone. So here's the idea for any who are willing. Think about your values and see if you can surface some value that's really important for you to live. And then play a game this week in finding ways, just as you described, to live that value in a situation where you might not normally do it.
I love that.
It's a stretch.
Yeah.
So, and then you guys can send us emails and let us know how you did.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm gonna do that for sure. I love challenges. I love games. And looking at the end of our chapter 3, we have a diagram that's always there at the end of every chapter. Things that show that I'm surviving or things that show that I'm thriving. And in the surviving category, it would be continue living my life based on borrowed values, doing what I believe I should do. Thriving, on the other hand, is becoming clear on what truly matters to me, what truly lights me up, and doing that. And as you said, infusing it into more and more things in our day-to-day life.
I got to say that phrase, doing what truly lights me up, that lights me up.
Yeah.
That's what thriving is, to be lit up. And as we say, one of the metrics, the greatest one for knowing if you're thriving or not, is the people around you know it. They can see it.
That's true. That's true. And as I was talking about my friend Meg, one of the things that she was doing was she was so lit up that she was lighting other people up. And so, we're at the end of our time here. I'm Christopher Harding.
And I'm Will Wilkinson. You've been listening to Thriving in Business and in Life. And our email is
thrivinginbusinessandlife@gmail.com. So send your comments and your stories, and we look forward to having you join us again soon.
See you next week.